Volunteers have contributed to lots of indexing projects at the National Archives, mainly working on site at Kew with our original documents. But not everyone who wants to volunteer and help index these records has been able to visit us in person. So we have been able to set up some projects where volunteers are able to work remotely from wherever they are in the world. In 2020, of course, this became more important than we could ever have imagined, when access to our building had to be restricted for staff as well as for volunteers. One of the projects that we were able to run was this one, which adds extra information to Discovery for the Ecclesiastical Census of 1851. This was a survey that was conducted at the same time as the population census that year, and the idea was to find out what provision there was for religious worship throughout England and Wales, and also how many people attended services on Sunday the 30th of March, which also happened to be Census Day. The results of this were far from perfect for a whole number of reasons, but the returns do still make very interesting reading. Just as in the population census, a schedule was delivered to every place of worship and collected later by the enumerator. There were three main types of schedule: one for the Church of England, which is in portrait format, and another one for nonconformist places of worship, which was in landscape format. This included Jewish synagogues. The third one was a special one, very similar to the other nonconformist ones, for the Society of Friends, better known as the Quakers. And although these three types of forms look different, they all asked much the same kind of information, so we were able to set up a single form to capture the information from them. The records are in our record series H0129, and they were microfilmed several years ago. And they've also been available for quite a long time as digital microfilm, which are PDF files that you can download free of charge from our website. Now, this project is different from others that we've run in the past because for the first time, we've used a third-party site called From the Page to host the images and the transcription forms that we designed. You can see the image that needs to be transcribed alongside the form to be completed. And there are tools within the site to rotate or to enlarge the image, to move it around on the page or make it full screen. All these things can make this a bit easier to read. The system allowed us also to set up drop-down menus for any indexing field that we wanted. And in this case, we used it for the religious denomination, which saved quite a lot of typing for the transcribers. And this is another example, again, from one of the nonconformist records. Another big difference of using From the Page was that instead of allocating batches to individual volunteers, anyone who signed up could just log in and start transcribing individual pages. Some people did large amounts of transcription and other people only did a few pages, but they all helped. Another thing that the volunteers could do was they could use a field at the bottom of the form, which was called Notes and Questions. This wasn't part of the transcription, but it was a place where they could have discussions among themselves, help each other out. This is an example where one of the volunteers was pointing out a useful site where people could check details of Church of England clergymen, and this was a nice feature which helped a lot. Fortunately, the transcription work was finished fairly quickly, and now we're working through the process of quality assurance, and we're uploading the results to Discovery. Now, originally these results were only catalogued by a registration district, as you'll see a little bit later on, But now you're able to search by place or by parish or by religious denomination. The names of the people who completed the schedules have also been indexed, and these were very often clergymen, but for many nonconformist congregations in particular, you'll see examples like lay preachers or meeting house keepers, or even the occupiers of private houses used for worship. This is an example of a local preacher for a Wesleyan chapel in Hertfordshire. In many cases, the form ended up being completed by the enumerator or the local registrar because he'd had no response from the church or chapel and had filled in a few details as best he could. Now, however well you think you've planned a project, there will always be issues you hadn't anticipated. And in this case, one of the things we had to do was to add to the list of religious denominations as we went along. And also we could update our instructions to transcribers to reflect some of these changes and anomalies that people had spotted as they went through. One of the other things that our volunteers discovered was that although we have always known for a long time that the returns included some from the Educational Census in the same year, we didn't know the actual extent of them or where they were. But the volunteers have noted where they found them, and although they haven't been transcribed as part of this project, we will be able to look at them in more detail later, so that's also very useful. There are a couple of items where perhaps a wrong form was used, or the returns for two chapels filled in on the same form, which couldn't be fitted into the online transcription, but they were fairly easy for us to deal with when we're uploading them to Discovery. And again, the volunteers could flag up that there was something there that needed to be reviewed. We chose to transcribe the basic details from the forms, but not every single piece of information that was there. This made the transcription process a bit simpler. And as the images are easily accessible, people can always go and look at the actual image, and you really should do that to get the full picture. One of the things we didn't transcribe was the notes in the remarks box, which are made by the person completing the schedule. Very often, like this one here, they're explaining how the congregation that Sunday would have been much bigger if the weather hadn't been quite so bad. And there was one from a Church of England vicar who apologised for not being able to supply all the information required because the previous incumbent and the congregation had recently gone over to the Roman Catholic Church and had taken all the records with them. Some people just gave much more information than was asked for and enclosed pieces of correspondence and questions and so on. These were all the kind of things that the volunteers came across as they worked through the records. So far, we're only part of the way through uploading the completed transcriptions to Discovery, which look like this to start with. As you can see, they're just catalogued by registration district. But now you can see what some of the expanded entries look like. So far, it's mostly parts of London and the southeast, and there are still some issues where we will need to go back and consult the original documents, for example, where it looks as though a page may have been missed out when the records were filmed, or the page is damaged or obscured in some way. But as we go along, we're adding more and more all the time, so it's well worth checking into Discovery from time to time over the next few months to see how many more are being uploaded. And that's an example of the full entry for a place of worship in London. It just gives you an idea of the information that you'll be able to see for each entry. And finally, these ecclesiastical census records, they're much more interesting than useful than many people have realised in the past. And I hope that the results of all the hard work by the volunteers on this project will open them up to a much wider audience of family historians and local historians and anyone who's interested. Thank you for listening.